November 11th, 1918, 5 a.m. In a railway car deep in the French forest of Compiègne, German General Wilhelm Gruner stares at the armistice terms that would end 4 years of unprecedented carnage. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Outside, the sound of distant artillery still echoes across the Western Front, where over 17 million souls have already perished. In just 6 hours, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns would finally fall silent. Germany would surrender, the Kaiser would flee, and the German Empire would collapse into revolution and defeat. But what if those trembling hands had never signed? What if in those crucial final months of 1918, Germany had found a way to turn the tide? What if the Central Powers had achieved the impossible? Victory in the Great War? Here's my question for you. If Germany had won World War I, which modern technology do you think would have been developed first? Television, jet engines, or nuclear weapons? Drop your answer in the comments and let me know why you chose that one. By the summer of 1918, Europe had been locked in the most devastating conflict in human history for 4 brutal years. What began as a regional dispute over the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand had exploded into a global war that redrew the very concept of modern warfare. On one side stood the Central Powers, the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm II, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Opposing them were the Entente powers, France, Britain, Russia, and eventually the United States, along with dozens of smaller nations. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of European civilization itself hung in the balance. By 1918, the German Empire was a nation transformed by war. Under the military leadership of Generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, Germany had effectively become a military dictatorship. The Hindenburg program had mobilized every aspect of German society for total war. Factories worked around the clock producing shells and poison gas. Women replaced men in munitions plants. Children collected metal for the war effort. The German people endured the turnip winter of 1916-17, when Allied naval blockades reduced them to eating animal feed. Yet Germany possessed formidable advantages. Their armies occupied Belgium, northeastern France, and vast swathes of Eastern Europe. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking Allied merchant vessels. Most crucially, the Bolshevik Revolution had eliminated Russia from the war in March 1918, freeing up over 1 million German troops for transfer to the Western Front. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the mercurial grandson of Queen Victoria, had spent decades building Germany into Europe's dominant industrial power. German steel production rivaled Britain's. German universities led the world in chemistry and physics. German generals had proven themselves masters of tactical innovation, from poison gas to stormtrooper tactics. The question in the summer of 1918 was whether German industrial might and military genius could overcome the material superiority of the Entente, particularly the arrival of fresh American troops under General John J. Pershing. Everything would depend on Germany's final gamble, the Spring Offensive. March 21st, 1918, 4:40 a.m. The largest artillery barrage in human history erupted along the Western Front. Over 6,000 German guns unleashed what Ludendorff called Operation Michael, Germany's last desperate bid for victory before American reinforcements could tip the balance permanently. The bombardment was unlike anything the world had seen. For 5 hours, German shells rained down on British positions along a 50-mile front. Poison gas mixed with high explosives. Communications were severed. Entire battalions simply vanished under the crushing weight of German firepower. Then came the stormtroopers, elite German assault units trained in new infiltration tactics. Armed with flamethrowers, grenades, and light machine guns, they punched through Allied lines like a spear through paper. Within days, German forces had advanced 25 miles, the largest territorial gain on the Western Front since 1914. Kaiser Wilhelm II was ecstatic. The battle is won. The English have been utterly defeated, he declared. In Berlin, crowds gathered to celebrate what seemed like imminent victory. Church bells rang across the German Empire. After 4 years of sacrifice, triumph appeared within reach. But the offensive was a poisoned chalice. German casualties mounted horrifically, over 240,000 men in the first phase alone. These weren't replaceable conscripts, but Germany's last reserves of experienced soldiers. Meanwhile, Allied commander Ferdinand Foch coordinated a unified defence, using railways to rush French and British reinforcements to threatened sectors. By July, Germany's position had become desperate. American troops were arriving at a rate of 250,000 per month. The German army, which had numbered 5.1 million men in early 1918, was rapidly bleeding away. Ludendorff's subsequent offensives, Operations Georgette, Blücher York and Gneisenau, each gained ground initially, but ultimately failed to achieve decisive breakthrough. The turning point came on August 8, 1918, what Ludendorff called the Black Day of the German army. British forces, spearheaded by tanks and supported by devastating artillery, smashed through German lines near Amiens. For the first time, entire German units surrendered without fighting. Discipline, the backbone of the German military machine, was finally cracking. Kaiser Wilhelm II's nerve began to fail. Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria warned that Germany faced certain catastrophe if the war continued. In the Reich Chancellery, officials whispered of revolution. Workers in Berlin went on strike. German sailors at Kiel mutinied rather than carry out a final suicidal attack on the British fleet. By October, Bulgaria had collapsed, the Ottoman Empire was suing for peace, and Austria-Hungary was disintegrating. German General Wilhelm Groener, who had replaced Ludendorff, faced an impossible situation. The German army was in full retreat. The home front was in revolt. The Royal Navy's blockade had reduced German civilians to near starvation. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. 2 days later, in that railway car in Compiègne, Groener signed the armistice that ended the Great War. Germany agreed to evacuate all occupied territory, surrender its fleet, and accept responsibility for the conflict. The German Empire, which had dominated Central Europe for nearly half a century, ceased to exist. But what if General Groener had made a different calculation in those final crucial months? In reality, Germany's spring offensive failed because Ludendorff lacked sufficient reserves to exploit his initial breakthroughs. German stormtroopers punched through Allied lines but couldn't hold the territory they gained. Supply lines stretched beyond capacity. Exhausted German divisions found themselves overextended and vulnerable to Allied counterattacks. Here's where history pivots. What if Germany had concentrated its offensive power more strategically? What if instead of launching multiple dispersed attacks across the Western Front, Ludendorff had focused everything on a single, decisive thrust toward Paris? In our alternate timeline, German military intelligence in early 1918 discovers critical intelligence about French railway schedules and British troop dispositions through captured documents. This intelligence reveals a narrow window, just 72 hours, when Allied reserves would be at their weakest point along the Somme sector. Rather than the historically scattered spring offensive, Germany gambles everything on Operation Wotan, a concentrated hammer blow with 2.5 million men aimed directly at the Allied communications hub of Amiens, and from there straight to Paris. March 15, 1918. Under cover of fog and unprecedented secrecy, German forces begin massing for Operation Wotan. Unlike the historical offensive, this concentration is invisible to Allied reconnaissance. Ludendorff has learned from previous failures. This time, breakthrough and exploitation forces are pre-positioned for immediate advance. March 21st, 4:40 a.m. The same massive artillery barrage erupts, but now it's concentrated along just 15 miles of front. The bombardment is twice as intense as historically occurred. British General Sir Hubert Gough's Fifth Army, already weakened by recent rotations, simply disintegrates under the crushing firepower. By noon, German stormtroopers have advanced 12 miles, deeper than any penetration since 1914. But this time, Ludendorff's exploitation forces are ready. Pre-positioned cavalry divisions and motorized infantry pour through the gap. By nightfall, German advance guards are approaching Amiens. March 22nd. Panic grips Allied headquarters. Ferdinand Foch rushes every available reserve toward the breakthrough, but German intelligence has anticipated this. Coordinated attacks by German aircraft and long-range artillery systematically destroy railway junctions, stranding Allied reinforcements. Meanwhile, German forces capture Amiens intact, severing the crucial railway link between British and French armies. March 25th. With Allied communications shattered, German forces begin the final advance on Paris. French Premier Georges Clemenceau broadcast a desperate appeal: "They shall not pass to Paris." But, unlike Verdun in 1916, French forces are scattered, demoralised and cut off from British support. In London, Prime Minister David Lloyd George faces a nightmare scenario. The British Expeditionary Force is trapped in a shrinking pocket around Calais. King George V summons an emergency session of Parliament. Opposition leader H. Asquith demands Lloyd George's resignation. "You have led the empire to catastrophe," he thunders. March 28th. German advance units reach the outer suburbs of Paris. At Versailles, the same palace where Germany would historically be humiliated, Kaiser Wilhelm II arrives to personally oversee the final assault. "Providence has delivered our enemies into our hands," he declares to his generals. But in Paris, something remarkable happens. Rather than fleeing, President Raymond Poincaré chooses to remain. "I will die in Paris before I see her surrender," he announces. French citizens, faced with the prospect of German occupation, rally in unprecedented unity. Barricades rise across the boulevards. Factory workers forge weapons in hidden workshops. March 30th. The siege of Paris begins. German artillery pounds the city, but unlike 1870, the French government doesn't collapse. Instead, the bombardment galvanizes resistance. From his headquarters in the Élysée Palace, Poincaré coordinates a fighting withdrawal through the city's arrondissements. Meanwhile, shocking news arrives from London. Faced with military catastrophe, King George V has dismissed Lloyd George and appointed Lord Lansdowne as Prime Minister with a mandate to negotiate peace. The British Empire, faced with potential collapse, chooses survival over victory. April 5th, 1918. In a secret ceremony at Windsor Castle, British and German representatives sign the Treaty of London. Britain agrees to recognise German hegemony over continental Europe in exchange for German recognition of British naval supremacy and imperial integrity. The Royal Navy's blockade of Germany ends immediately. April 10th. With British withdrawal from the war, French resistance in Paris becomes hopeless. President Poincaré, rather than surrender, dramatically shoots himself in his office overlooking the Champs-Élysées. His final words, recorded by his secretary: "Better death than dishonour." April the 12th. German forces occupy Paris. At the Arc de Triomphe, Kaiser Wilhelm II holds a victory parade. German bands play Die Wacht am Rhein, where Napoleon once celebrated his conquests. The French Republic ceases to exist. But victory brings unexpected challenges. In Washington, President Woodrow Wilson declares that America will never recognize German hegemony over Europe. US factories begin unprecedented military expansion. In Moscow, Lenin sees opportunity in European chaos, ordering the Red Army to prepare for westward expansion. Most surprisingly, German victory unleashes forces the Kaiser never anticipated. German industrialists, emboldened by conquest, demand colonial expansion. German scientists, freed from wartime constraints, begin developing revolutionary technologies, rockets, advanced chemistry, even theoretical work on atomic physics. By Christmas 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II rules an empire stretching from the Rhine to the Urals. But this victory is unstable, dependent on constant military occupation, and facing growing resistance from subjugated populations across Europe. The decisive moment comes in the spring of 1920. French resistance fighters, supplied covertly by American agents, launch coordinated uprisings across occupied France. Simultaneously, Lenin's Red Army strikes westward, seeking to liberate German-occupied territories for communist revolution. Kaiser Wilhelm II faces the challenge that ultimately destroys all overextended empires, fighting enemies on multiple fronts with insufficient resources. German forces, spread from Paris to Kiev, find themselves battling French guerrillas in the west and Bolsheviks in the east. The turning point occurs at the Battle of Warsaw in June 1920. German forces attempting to hold the line against the Red Army are overwhelmed by superior Soviet numbers. The fall of Warsaw triggers revolts across German-occupied Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Ukraine all declare independence simultaneously. In Paris, news of German defeats in the east triggers a general uprising. French resistance fighters, led by the charismatic Colonel Charles de Gaulle, proclaim the restoration of the French Republic from the steps of Notre Dame. German garrison forces, demoralized and outnumbered, begin withdrawing toward the Rhine. By December 1920, the German Empire's brief European hegemony has collapsed. Kaiser Wilhelm II, facing revolution at home and military defeat abroad, abdicates for the second time. This time, there is no exile to the Netherlands. German Republicans arrest him and establish the Weimar Republic 18 months early. The final irony comes in 1921. The Treaty of Potsdam, negotiated between the new German Republic, a restored France, and Lenin's Soviet Union, creates a balance of power eerily similar to what emerged historically, but with one crucial difference. The temporary German victory has demonstrated European weakness to both America and Russia, accelerating both nations' emergence as global superpowers. France, having experienced occupation, emerges more militaristic and nationalist than in our timeline. The brief German Empire's collapse leaves Europe more fractured, more suspicious, and ultimately more vulnerable to the ideological conflicts that would define the 20th century. In this alternate world, German victory in World War I merely delayed and ultimately intensified the conflicts that would reshape the modern world. By demonstrating that rapid military success could overthrow the European balance of power, Germany's brief triumph encouraged other ambitious powers to pursue similar strategies. The technological innovations that emerged during Germany's two-year European empire, advanced rockets, synthetic materials, and early atomic research, accelerated the development of weapons that would make World War II even more devastating. The German scientists who pioneered these technologies under Kaiser Wilhelm II's patronage would become the foundation for both American and Soviet space programs in the 1930s. Perhaps most significantly, this timeline's Europe emerged more fragmented and nationalist than in our reality. French revanchism, intensified by the experience of occupation, created a more militaristic France. German guilt over their imperial overreach produced a more radical communist movement in the German Republic. Eastern European nations, having experienced both German and Soviet occupation, developed fierce independence movements that would resist all foreign influence. The world of 1925 in this timeline would be more multipolar, more militarized, and more ideologically extreme than the one that emerged from German defeat. The lesson of history, that military victory without sustainable political foundations creates instability rather than peace, will be demonstrated not in Germany's defeat, but in the chaos that followed their brief Pyrrhic victory. The Great War's true tragedy wasn't that Germany lost. It was that anyone believed such a war could ever be truly won.